Welcome back. I am so excited that you have joined me again in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I'm Kate Nagai, and I am your host and womb guide on this journey. I'm here to help you to lean into the language of your menstrual cycle so that you can align yourself and awaken and activate to your womb wisdom to live the most inspired life. I am so excited to jump into this episode and to dive into today's topic. So let's get started. This week, we have a special guest coming on and someone who I am really excited to hear her story, because when she sent me her bio, I was like, what? Wait a minute. Let's go back a second here, reread that. So I cannot wait to hear the wisdom that she has to share with us and how she is going to help guide us on how to use the power of our body, our feminine energy, to really call in everything that it is that we're deeply desiring in our life and in our work life. So I'm so excited to introduce you to Tania Vasallo. She is the founder and host of the podcast, The Courage to Be Happy. Seriously, how exciting is that as a name for a podcast? I can't wait to listen to it. It's her mission to support and teach high-achieving women entrepreneurs the mindset, tools, and strategies to become financially empowered so that they do not have to depend on others. Since the launch of her business, working part-time, she was able to reach the six-figure revenue by her fourth year with only working 20 hours a week. Tania has helped hundreds of clients all over the world. She specializes in transforming their mindset from lack to abundance and prosperity so that they feel empowered and confident. Now listen to this, everyone. In her first Money Magic Miracles cohort, she had 28 women who altogether manifested over $1.2 million collectively in just 8 weeks. Like, hello, I need to know more.
I know, that was awesome.
So Tania, welcome. And I cannot wait to hear all about your story, how you got here and this work that you're doing and how you're using your body, your cycle, your feminine energy to call it all in.
Oh, thank you, Kate, for having me here. And I just wanted to make a pointer with, you were saying the Courage to Be Happy podcast. For any listeners, that's been our brand up to now. We're in the middle of rebranding. So the podcast, you will find the podcast as The Courage to Be, but the brand and the website is still under The Courage to Be Happy. So if you're looking for me and you're like, oh, but there's another Tania with The Courage to Be Happy or The Courage to Be, it's all the same Tania, just so you know, because we're in the process of all of this. So thank you, Kate, for having me. Thank you for sharing this. And yeah, I'm excited to share my journey and my story with you and with your listeners.
Yes, yes. And can I just say how crazy is rebranding? Like I've rebranded twice now, and there's a part of my body's like, let's do it again. And I'm like, no, let's not do it again.
Not yet. Yes. I'm still in the process of transitioning all the emails. Like there's so much resistance with that because I have to move the whole team with our emails. So my email's still at The Courage to Be Happy. And I'm like, I can't. Like, I hear you with the whole rebranding. Like, that's a calling in process, allowing
well, and I think for myself, I always want to rebrand when the next level of me gets rebirthed. I used to be Sacred Spaces Yoga, only focused on yoga. And then it was like this whole different shift happened in me where I started teaching about fertility and about the womb space. And then She Revival came out. And now like this next level of me is being birthed in of where I really want to go with my work. And so there's other names kicking around there. I'm like, no, not ready to be there. Like She Revival is still it. So yes, I think for anyone that's listening, that's like rebranding, it really is a part of your personality. It is really what you are hoping and desiring to put out into the world. So I love the courage to be. It's just, yes, that's what you do, the courage to be. Which leads me into our first question today, because I know that when I was reading through your stuff, you grew up in Spain, a very patriarchal system.
Yes.
I would love to know how you got from perhaps how you were raised to now being this empowered woman's coach, teaching and living by your cycle and with divine feminine energy, which I'm guessing probably wasn't your story growing up.
No, not at all. Thank you for bringing that up, because it brings us into reflection of, who we are, where we've been raised. So yeah, my career started earlier on. It's funny that we're talking about rebranding. I started as an art director in New York City. So I worked in advertising for multi-million-dollar accounts like Samsung, Nabisco, Starbucks, AT&T. And I would problem solve for all these huge corporations and do their advertising. I was in charge of more of the artistic side of it. But it got to a point where corporate didn't feel in alignment with me, even though it provided a lot of great things in my early 20s. I got to supervise amazing teams, and I got to travel all over the world in luxury. It was a fun job, but it got to a point where I knew I wanted something different. And in a way, that's rebranding yourself, whether it's your own personal business or like seeking what's the next level, like you're saying, Kate. So I ended up moving back to Spain because my husband was also an art director in New York. And so we both quit our jobs and we're like, where should we live? We wanted to learn a little bit about photography, and we moved back to Spain where we got married. So I was born and raised in Madrid, in the capital. But we moved back to Galicia, which is the northwestern part. We have a family farmhouse there, 11 generations. And we came back after 4 years living in Spain and decided, where do we want to live in the States? And we chose Santa Fe, New Mexico, ran the studio for a little bit longer. We offered all kinds of branding, creative services, photography, marketing. And we did it for a while. But here's the thing: when you have husband and wife team trying to run a business, it has its own challenges. And I'm happy because at one point my husband said, I don't want to run the studio anymore. I just want to focus on my art. And I thought that was great because it kind of gave me a little bit of breathing space, it's great. He's clear as to what he wants to do. It's great because I felt like a bigger calling and I wanted to run things my way. So I wouldn't have that conflict, of butting heads with him, because you have two art directors trying to run a business with no business background, with no, nothing. Like, we had no type of business training. So it left me in this space of wanting to understand and what I wanted to do next. So there was a lot of soul searching in that period, of like, who am I? Where did I come from? I consider myself multi-passionate. Like, I have every degree in the world that you can imagine relating to self-development, self-improvement. Like Louise Hay certification, Jack Canfield with Success Principles, Landmark Education. You name them, I've done it. I have everything. But I also worked as a professional photographer, and I also worked as an art director. And so there was all these questions of like, how do I combine everything? Who am I serving? Why am I here? What's my purpose on this planet? And simultaneously, funny enough, that we're on this podcast, I had just become a mom. I had a little baby toddler at that point, 18 months old. And I'm like, what's next for me? I don't know what to do. And I launched The Courage to Be Happy. That's what it was at that time. And that's what felt aligned for me. And I started teaching women about branding. Those were my first events that I would do. I'd do these 3-day events, and they were called A Brand New You. Women would come in and they would just transform after 3 days. We'd talk about branding, but I'd infuse it with a lot of my coaching skills and knowledge and tools. And I started doing great with the business. And within, like you said, 4 years, working 20 hours a week, I was able to achieve that 6-figure revenue without even being on social media. So it was like a huge accomplishment and, like this milestone of like, yes, I did it. And then COVID hit. So that's a whole other story, and why partly the rebranding and all that stuff. But in that interim, of like soul searching, finding who I was, understanding where I came from. Even though I was born and raised in Spain, my dad's Spanish, my mom's American. So it's an important distinction just to understand the masculine side of things, coming from my dad, as well as the feminine side. That the feminine happens to be my mom, that's American. And I started to become very interested in my relationship with money too. I'm like questioning all that, like, what's my relationship with money? Like, why do some women succeed more with their businesses, others don't? So there was a lot of understanding with that. I also surrounded myself with a lot of mentors and teachers and the money space and the abundance space, prosperity, and trying to understand why, I was capable of manifesting amazing things, or why my business was taking off, or why other people's business wasn't, like what were the blocks. So I started teaching money mindset. That's why that program that you talked about of Money Magic Miracles, that's my new signature program. We've been running it for like a year and a half now. And we've had, I think, almost 100 people run through it already with the different cohorts. But I feel like it's so integrated, like the money, our beliefs, patriarchy, like there was so much that was uncovered for me, So I grew up in Spain at the end of Franco's dictatorship. So we didn't transition into more of a democracy until the 1980s, even though Franco passed in 75. But there's still a lot of stuff that we're carrying, of just that patriarchal, that dictatorship, everything's meant for men. Add another layer to that. My dad's 7 brothers and 1 sister, and the sister's the youngest one. My grandmother kept on trying to have babies for the girl, and the girl came after the 8th try. So there's an added component of that patriarchy. And so when I was analyzing this whole idea of like money and, what are my limiting beliefs and understanding all these things, a lot was tied with my upbringing. Like a lot of these limiting beliefs were passed down to me through ancestry, through my dad's side. Then through my mom's side, you have my grandparents that lived through the Depression, which I'm sure a lot of Americans can relate through this. So once you start doing that work and understanding it, you start healing and you can kind of break through it. So I don't go around, like I'm thankful for the time of history that I was born and raised and that we're living in right now. I don't like going around as women because there's still a lot of work to be done for women, like even though the women's movement's been around, for all these years, there's still a lot of women oppressed all around the globe. There's still a lot of limiting beliefs that we have as women, that have been passed down to us that we're still trying to break through, because we either haven't had an opportunity to heal from it and to understand it, or we're in the process of it. It's funny that we're talking about rebranding too. There's no coincidences that happened that way, Kate, because I'm in a phase right now with the launch of my podcast of a new purpose and a new cause that's come out from me of supporting women. And this has all to do with patriarchy and my upbringing and giving freedom and voice to all of us that have been oppressed, women, men, minorities, LGBT community, like it's for all of us, because we can all relate at that level. But since the launch of my podcast this year, I have this huge calling of closing the gender gap in the podcasting world and starting this movement where we give voices to women in the podcasting world. Whether it's more women podcasters, whether it's more women guesting on podcasts, or women that want to start a podcast. Because the statistics are still 70% of the most listened podcasts are by men. Our podcast hosts are men. There's more men listeners than women. There's more guests that are men than women. So the cause keeps, even though there's rebranding and new ideas, like you're saying, there's this thread, of like fighting for our freedom and for freedom of expression, honestly, like it went with the money aspect of it. And I'm still teaching these things, helping women with their business. But now it's like helping women's voices be heard through the podcasting world. So any of you that are listening to this podcast, men or women, I'm guessing that the majority are women, but if, like keep on listening to more podcasts, keep on listening to Kate's podcast. Maybe you have a message that you want to put out into the world and you've been fearing it, or you have a fear of visibility, or you don't know how to do it. Just keep on doing it, because by you listening to more women's podcasts out there, you're supporting more women, you're supporting the collective. If you happen to be a man listening to this, support the women in your life. That's where I feel the gift of patriarchy and the time that I was born and raised has given me. And then the flip side to that is also the gift of my mom being American, because I'm able to live in this country, and I have dual citizenship. I have American nationality. So I really, truly feel that this is my purpose. The fact that I had a Spanish dad, patriarchy, the culture, and then an American mom that injects the feminine side and allowing things to unfold instead of pushing so hard with things, has just been very interesting, and it's still unraveling, as we're going. So I don't know if that answers exactly, Kate, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of perspectives from all of the different sides.
Yeah. And, for anybody who's listening too, I think sometimes there's this uncomfortableness of using the word patriarchy because it feels like we're attacking men. Like, I think still as a part of us as women, we're like, well, we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to disrupt the relationships.
Yeah.
But it's important to know that when we use the word patriarchy isn't male bashing. Patriarchy is a system that was built on power and having a laid out plan of how power needs to land in the people's hands. So historically, it was like kings and royalty, then it was the church, and then it was the men. Men were the next in line, right? And women were right at the bottom. Like, women weren't valued as a source of wisdom, knowledge. We were before the patriarchy became a part of the system. We wiped out this seeing what value women bring. And I think this is where it's so important for us to know the difference is that we all have masculine and feminine energy within us. The patriarchy is based on a system that only really allows for masculine energy, but not divine masculine energy is the way I like to call it. When we are in both divine feminine or masculine energy, we're living in a place of the highest potential for the qualities of that energy, right? And what we're seeing with the patriarchy is that we've created a damaged masculine. We've created this sense of power, of fighting, of success is only through knowledge. Feminine is about wisdom. And I heard this so beautifully put by, I think his name is Richard Rood, if I'm remembering correctly here. He's the one that designed the gene keys. But he said, wisdom is feminine at its finest, because wisdom is the knowing in the not knowing. Where knowledge is that we've taken wisdom, we've applied it, we've tested it, we've proved it, and then it becomes knowledge, which is what we really see in a lot of businesses and medicine, and which are really rooted patriarchal systems, right? Before, medicine was female, it was woman, it was midwives, it was healers. And now it's like there's no value unless there's science behind it, which is what deflates feminine nature and feminine culture. And so when we talk about, or when you were talking about like growing up in Spain and having this patriarchal system and having your dad have 7 brothers, right? What we're seeing is saying, because you have this body part, because you are defined as this gender, you hold the power in the family. You get to make the rules. You get to make the decisions. And it's the system that gave that power. It's seen that there couldn't be equality. And it's beautiful that you're sharing that, like, part of your exploration has been going back into that environment, experiencing it again, coming back into a different environment, which I want to argue that the North America is still very much rooted in patriarchal thought, right? But I think that we have more women rising and more powerful women that are like, this stuff's now, and it's putting the voice back in of the feminine, right? So they're doing some of the work to rewrite our new history that's about to happen. And so when we talked, and it's so funny that rebranding came up, because this has really now been like the thread that's weaving this conversation.
I know. Who would have known?
Everything happens for a reason. But when I think of rebranding, and when I said, like, every time a part of me grows, I want to rebrand. And it's because every time a part of me heals, I want someone to see me differently, right? And I do that through how people identify with me, right? And so I think what you said is totally aligned, of that, you know, you grew up in this way, and then you've had to come to this point where you had to go, okay, this is my past. This is where I want my future to be. Now, what do I need to heal to understand how I can become me? Right? Does that kind of align with what you're saying?
Absolutely. And there's two things that I wanted to point out, because you said it so beautifully, you know, like the definition of how patriarchy has evolved. And one thing that jumped out for me when you were saying, like, knowledge is more based on science versus wisdom. And I think it's important to add to this distinction, or at least how I see it. I feel like knowledge is out there, and that's what's been valued. And patriarchy we've valued masculine qualities a lot more. And so knowledge is out there, wisdom is within. And I think that's a big distinction to understand, because that can scare men sometimes, you know, like, where men or women, or you could use it to your advantage too, because, like you're saying, it's not a man or woman thing. We all carry that masculine and feminine energy within us. It's just we've, as a society, given more value to the qualities and the masculine energy: productivity, power, competitiveness, structure, doing, systems, push, go, do. And we need that. You can't not live a life without having those things. But the feminine, which is more the wisdom versus the knowledge, that would, for me, qualifies more into the masculine energy. You know, the feminine is more receptive. You know, we were made with vaginas to receive, you know, the seed, you know, inside of us. So it's receiving, it's intuition, it's wisdom, it's nurturing, creativity. And when we can start rising and valuing that part as a society, as a group, as a person, as an individual, and saying, oh my God, that side of me is as valuable, and sometimes even more than the other one. Like, you want to have them in balance. You know, you don't want to just sit back and be like, oh, I'm going to manifest, but I'm not going to do anything, and I'm not going to take action. You need a little bit of both. And it's really important to see where you fall. Where is your identity? Because I'll tie in another story with what you were saying with patriarchy, 7 brothers. You know, when my sister was born, I'm the older of 2. And when she was born, they were convinced she was going to be a boy. I was only 2.5 years old, but I could already perceive at this age. And this is when we create our belief system, you know, from ages 0 to 7, before our consciousness, our rational side of the brain gets formed. So she's born. They even had a name for her, which was Sergio. And suddenly it's a girl. And I must have perceived the disappointment in my dad, you know, like, damn, I have 2 girls, you know, like, this must not be girl. Like, and whatever way a 2.5-year-old, 3-year-old can make meaning of this. So from that age on, I wanted to be a boy. And because I understood that boys had it better, that boys had it easier, and that I would receive the love from my dad, you know, like, so that at least he'd be happy, like I could make him happy and please him, you know, like, if I pretend to be a boy, then everything will be nice and calm. And if I'm a boy, life is going to be easier for me. I'll get the things that others don't have. So from age 2.5 to like my teenage years, I didn't wear a single dress. I would cry if they'd make me wear a dress to a birthday party. I did not play with Barbies. I cried actually at my 12th birthday. My mom gave me a Barbie, a vintage Barbie that she had from like the 50s. And I cried Now I'm like, oh my God, give me the Barbie back. That's the value of that Barbie. Yeah, I made it very clear that I did not want to be identified as a girl because there was going to be disadvantages for me. And that's been a whole other detanglement in itself, and just honoring the feminine side of me, and that I'm a woman, and that I'm proud of being a woman, and connecting to that feminine side of me. So it's very interesting, because then also you have the flip side to that I feel that men in our society that are more connected to their female and their feminine energy are looked upon negatively, like the artists, the musicians, that have a certain sensibility that can connect to that intuitive side, to that feminine energy, to creation, to birthing things, whether it's a piece of music or an art piece, or these type of men are poo-pooed on, or like, oh, he's such a pussy. He's such a this, or he's so, he must be gay, or he's so sensitive, like, get your act together. Like, it's just, it hasn't served men or women in our society, the whole patriarchy, because we're not giving permission for men to have emotions, because that's seen as too feminine, too girly, get your act together. So it's work in progress. We are not there yet, as a society, and understanding who we are and stepping in to our full authentic selves and finding that balance of those energies and valuing them and being okay with wherever people are with that.
It's interesting because you just said something about how you reflected on your childhood of how you didn't want to wear dresses, you didn't want dolls, and then you healed, and now you're women empowered, right? And I think this is an important thing to like draw back on, is that when we want to up level our business, when we want to heal something that is out of balance in our body, a lot of the work is going back into our story, into our history, and seeing what our story was and how it makes us feel. So that way we can now begin to envision and dream how we want to be seen, how we want to be known. So we take who we were and how it didn't feel good, it didn't feel aligned, and then we bring it now into, this is who I want to be. And that's the healing. This is why I always kind of giggle to myself when people are like, I had a polyp and now it's gone. I don't know what happened. Or you have this, like Louise Hay, her story of cancer, right? And healing from cancer. I think sometimes when we give ourselves permission to reflect and to feel what didn't feel good, and then to reframe to feel differently, we give the potential for healing to happen. You can call it miracles, you can call it magic, you can call it whatever you want, but really you're shifting your perspective to say, I want to feel different. And I think this is why, like yourself, going from having this business and working with your husband to all of a sudden now being where you're at, it's because you decided on your own that I want to be this, but I can't be this if I'm living my old story, if I'm hearing you correctly. So you had to go back and you had to review your story.
It is. And it's so tied into the type of work that I teach with money mindset, because it all goes back to our beliefs, because both of this, like, talking about the feminine, or even like, God forbid, that there's a new way of doing work and business connected with your cycle and the cycles, of life. No. Patriarchy it's linear. It was designed for men because men were the ones that were in the workforce. But back to the beliefs that we carry, whether it's with work, about myself, my identity, with money, with all these taboo subjects, but you have to revisit. If you want to heal, if you want to grow, if you want to transcend, you do have to revisit those stories. And they might be painful, but the invitation is to look at those stories as an observer versus getting hooked by them again. Cause I could get all hooked by like, oh, well, my dad did this and my parents and and I did go through some of that for a while. It's like, it's so unfair that men, but I don't like going around as a victim. It's like, it's more, let me analyze, let me understand. Like you were saying with Louise Hay, I do believe that all our stories and our pains and our emotions get manifested in the body. And that was one of the big things that Louise Hay always said. So yes, revisit it. Why am I getting that polyp? Why am I not able to conceive? Why did I have this miscarriage? Why that, like your body's trying to tell you something, and that's just emotions that might have been repressed. And because you haven't been listening and you haven't been paying attention to your story, it's trying to manifest in any other way. Our bodies are so wise, of just telling us what's going on. It's the bigger question is, am I listening?
And, sometimes it's not even that it is an actual event that has happened that you can be like, this was the moment, right? Sometimes it's this idea of bringing ancestral stories into our makeup. So things that are part of our lineage that we haven't actually lived, but we can feel the vibration of that. And this became really prominent for me in just the last, honestly, 2 months. My dad passed away 3 months ago, and my dad and I were super close. Like we just were the same person in so many ways. And so losing him was a really big loss in my life, a really huge one. And he never in my life did he ever make me feel like you are a girl, so you are less than. In fact, he was my biggest champion. And it always made me giggle when he was trying to tell people what I did for work. Cause he was like, well, what words do I use? Like, I don't know what, just talk to my daughter, right? He was my biggest champion. But this aha moment happened about a month after he died. I was in my meditation and I was feeling stuck in my business. I was feeling stuck with my identity. I was feeling stuck I've been fighting for 2 years of working through my own visibility issues of like, how can I say what I do for work and feel anchored in it and feel proud of it versus feeling like I talk about the menstrual cycle. Like, how can I stand up and declare it versus whisper it to the world? And it's been a hard thing for me to work through. And I didn't know where it came from because I didn't grow up in a family that was like, you can't talk about that. Like no one ever told me I couldn't. But in this meditation after he passed, about a month after he passed, I came out of it and I was like, the paternal line that has linked me to my dad's side of the family that was very patriarchal is now gone. Like now that he's gone, I don't know if I'll ever spend family time with any of his side of the family because like that lineage is now dead. And so there was like this moment of going, this is my dad's final gift to me. He's now gone. There's no reason why I have to feel unsafe to be seen, right? And it wasn't because my cousins or my uncles or anybody treated me poorly. It was an energy held in that line. And now that it's been severed, a part of me feels free, which is probably why I'm like itching to rebrand again. Cause I'm just like, this is who I am, everyone. Right. And so there's something that's awakened in me, but it was me identifying with that. It wasn't my dad. It's not his family. It is some story that was carried in that family line that I've always felt. And to be honest, my grandparents were very patriarchal. So but they've been gone for years. So that's not like, but that I know was ingrained in part of everyone's perspective. And now I feel free from it. And so it's really beautiful that when we sit with it and we give ourselves the opportunity to reflect of like, what is holding me back? Why am I not being successful? Why is it I'm not achieving my goals? Why is it that I'm just not feeling the best version of me? Sometimes it's this energetic tie. And when we give ourselves permission to visit it, then we find the answers. That way we can grow.
Absolutely. That's amazing that you have that awareness, with your dad's passing, and how that has an effect on us. That's amazing, Kate, that you went through that.
And I think the beautiful thing about it is that now every day when I wake up, it's like he gave me one last gift. His last gift to me was to show up as I am, because he was the person that supported me and really amplified who I want to be, right? And so if I'm really honoring him as my father, I now have an opportunity to take this last gift and run with it. And so that's what kind of like, whether or not that's actually, but that's how I have wrote it now in my system, is like, this is my gift. And now I need to do this in memory of him, because I'm free. I'm free from whatever ties were holding me back. So
that's amazing. That's great. I love that story.
Are you wanting to understand your cycle better, to understand your rhythm, the language of your womb, and to really begin to connect deeper with your body? Then I invite you to go and grab my free charting journal. This is a charting journal to chart for both your physical, your emotional, and your spiritual self, to deeply connect to your womb wisdom and to understand how to live more in alignment with your energy, so that you can have more self-love, more compassion, and you can live your life to the fullest with so much pleasure, with so much fun, and with excitement. It is time for us to be empowered by our womb wisdom and by the language of our cycle. So hop on over to the link below in the show notes and grab your free copy of the Charting Journal today. Okay, so I want to dive in, because I don't want to take you here forever. We can talk for hours, I swear.
I know.
I love this conversation. But I really want to know, how do you use your cycle, and how have you been using your cycle to help you deepen into this idea of feminine energy in your business?
Yes. I think I've been using my cycle, and I don't know when or where I got exposed to it, because I'm fascinated with it. Like, I love that you're doing this work. I know Kate Northrup does this work. There's also the red code. Like, I've been fascinated with, learning about it, because no one teaches us at school, and especially to girls, of like how you can utilize the power of your cycle. And again, the cycles in patriarchy have been very linear, and meaning patriarchy, that's what we've been given down, because that made sense. It was mostly men in the workforce. So men cycle in 24 hours, women cycle in 28 days. When men cycle in 24 hours, that's why, our work days are from 9 to 5. And we do, so we go through these different systems that have been set up by men because it served men. When I became aware of cycles and to set up your business according to your cycle, I was fascinated. I'm like, I have to try this. So if you look at my calendar, it says when my period comes. My period's pretty regular. So, and I know I get pretty strong cramps, and I want to be alone. I don't want to be hanging out with anyone. So I have it. I've had it on my calendar for the last 2-3 years. There's 4 or 5 days in red that says period, rest. Do not book anything. Do I honor it all the time? No, because sometimes it might overlap, but I try and pay attention to it as much as I can. And now I'm at another level of just, because I understand that when, like, I know with my body during period time, I need introspection. I want to just veg around, lie around. I don't really want to hang out with my husband or my daughter. Like, I want to be with me. Don't bother me. It's like I'm going into my cave. But what's become fascinating now throughout this last year is incorporating the other parts of the cycle, like ovulation, like, oh, that's the time when I'm feeling connected, because sometimes I see myself, you can tell that I do a lot of introspection and analysis of myself and who I am and how I act. And I'd be like, oh, am I an introvert or an extrovert? People that know me think that I'm an extrovert. I consider myself an introvert, and maybe I'm an ambivert. Maybe I'm right in the middle. And I get this from both sides, my dad and my mom. My dad is complete extrovert, out there always with people, like at this extreme of it. And my mom's at the complete opposite extreme. She's the introvert. I feel like I'm in the middle. But one coach that I had years ago, she said, you're not either or. She's like, you know what I think you are? She's like, I think you're a social introvert. Like you just need that time for yourself where you don't get energized by being with people. But when you have to, you're great socially. So, I think this has to do with my cycle, of understanding that, because I'm like, oh, could it be that maybe I'm more extroverted and social during ovulation? Because that's the time that you want to go out, your body's saying, go get, you're fertile, go get pregnant somewhere, like that's the sign that your body's telling you. So I try and book all my like get-togethers or coffees or networking events and stuff during ovulation as much as I can. And I try and stay away during my period with those kind of activities where I have to interact with other people, because I know I'm just going to end up saying no or canceling at the last minute. So if anyone that's listening, if you have not studied your cycle, here's another one that happens to me a lot too. And I've had it with one of my close friends. Her period's about to come and she goes into like deep PMS and she's starting to get like all depressed, or everything bothers her about like whatever, her boyfriend or other things. And I have to remind her, I'm like, you're entering your period, I'll ask her, I'm like, is your period coming? Or she's like, I'm 2 days away. I'm like, okay, don't book anything. Don't listen to yourself right now because you're not making sense, and know and remind yourself that after these next 5 days, you will come out of it and you'll have a completely different perspective than what you have right now. And it's funny to bounce it back and forth to each other, because it'll happen to me too. Like I might not realize that my period's coming, or I haven't looked at the calendar and I'm like, oh, that's why I'm all sensitive right now. Okay. Let's take a pause. Let's not pay attention to it. We're going through a cycle. It's like, you don't want to fight it, like just surrender to it, embrace it, be part of it. It makes such a difference when you can align I'm lucky that I have a business, so I can create it in that way. How awesome would it be if they honored women's cycles in the workforce and said, oh, you're during your period, you know what? Work from home. It's totally fine. We won't schedule any meetings. Like, how amazing would that be to give that space so that when they are done with their period, they can be 10 times more productive. How many of us does that happen? Like when you're in a different phase, of the cycle, that you're like 100 times more productive, and something that would have taken you normally 10 hours during your period takes you just 1 hour to do. Yes. So I think it's fascinating. I'm loving that you're doing this work. I think it's so needed, Kate, and we need more women talking about this and understanding and explaining it to the men in our lives too, so that we can co-create together, because my husband and I take turns putting my daughter to sleep. Hey, well, what if like the week of my period, I won't do it, and I'll have more energy and more strength the following week, or my week of ovulation, and it gives you a break, so it's all working with it. I really invite anyone listening to start paying attention to this and follow Kate and see what shows up for you.
Well, and we talk a lot about how to cycle sync our whole life in my monthly membership, the She Sisterhood. There's 13 different modules, one for each month. And we have a month on relationships, and we have a month on how to parent and use your cycle. And we have one on the work woman, because I think these are so fundamental. Even if the world out there is not ready to support us yet, how we can start to know our body so that we can choose better, so that we feel more inspired, we feel more alive, and we feel more rested every day of our cycle. And that comes from us knowing us and then trying to now implement it into these different arenas in our life. And part of that aha moment that I had when I was like, this is my dad's final gift to me, in that meditation, which also happened during my menstruation.
Oh, wow. Which is supposed to be the most intuitive part of the month,
So
right?
intuitive. Yes, it was crystal clear that I needed to start talking about this in corporate world, in lunch and learns, and in schools. And so with that big moment, I was like, this is really where I'm going. I created a whole other page on my website for corporate work because I'm like, no, you know what? This is the movement. This is what I want to do, is I want to start transforming how companies and how we are supporting women, and how can we start to create period positivity within the workplace that actually doesn't feel so icky and
shameful,
so overwhelming.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was reading this article once where someone had talked about, if this feels like really out there kind of information for you of how can I put this in my work world? Think of the first maternity leave that probably ever happened. It probably was not received with, yes, this is great that you get to take time off work and get home.
Not only that, Kate, maternity leave, that's a whole other subject. And I have a couple of stories with that. Maternity leave here in the States is still horrible. It's not supporting women in any way. The law says that if you're in a company with 50 employees or less, you're not even entitled to your job back if you're pregnant. And then you only get, in some jobs, 3 months, and it might not be full pay. It might only be 80%, so these are things that we just haven't evolved as a society to support women in the workplace, so I love that you're wanting to, just keep on going with this movement and bringing it into corporate. And
we are going to do it. We are going to change the world.
It is.
And I don't think it's that far out there. I don't think it's far out there. I don't think it's far out there for this change to happen. I think that people are more receptive than we give them credit for. It's going to feel icky. There's going to be some times there's going to be pushback, but I think that it is not that far away from this being something that is becoming normalized. So.
And it's so interesting. I have a story with my dad, was the general manager, CEO of Disney in Spain. And when he started the company there, he's retired for many years, but he had a team, and most of his team were women. And this was in the 90s. One of the women that came in when she was first pregnant, she was nervous to tell my dad. So we're talking, we transitioned from the dictatorship into democracy in the 80s. So 10 years later, so it wasn't even that long after, she was nervous to come into my dad as her boss and say, I'm pregnant, because she didn't know how he would react. And luckily, he reacted in a positive way, because we need men to support women like this, and that's where, what you're saying with your dad giving you that gift. Yes, my dad is still very ingrained in the patriarchal. He's the most dominant. He's the man of the family, all these things. But there's been great gifts too, of how he's supported me in my journey, whether it's been financially, with his own stories, his experiences. And so this woman came in and she's like, I'm pregnant. I hope this is how is this going to affect my job or whatever? And he was so excited for her. He's like, oh my God, this is so excited. First baby in the company or whatever. And then the next one came, and the 20 years that he ran the business there, I don't even know how many babies were born, in that time period. So it's really important for this type of movement, where we can encourage, women working with their cycle, honoring it instead of shaming it in the workplace, or talking about maternity leave or paternity leave, that we can support it, not only from the women's perspective, but from the men coming in and supporting the women in their lives, because you want to support your daughters, your sisters, your moms. I don't know if the moms are still working for the men out there, but yes, we want to support it together as a collective.
And the thing is if men are supporting women, we're already creating the healing that we need in the world for men to begin to support men. This isn't just about women being shut out. This is also about divine masculine energy being repressed as well. So if we can create space for women to live more authentically, we can create space for men to live more authentically. And then if we're all in this space of living in our most divine energy, our most balanced energy, then really we're unstoppable as a society.
Yeah.
Like this is where things are going to get healed and changed. And this is where we'll see more of that, 6 figures in 20 hours per week and $1.2 million collectively, like what you mentioned in your bio. Those are the things that we're going to start to see more of because we're all operating from a place of complete alignment and not scarcity and not fear and not shame and not imposter syndrome. So I love that you're doing this work. And I love that you're helping women to feel more empowered through understanding divine feminine energy and, starting to think about like, where am I at in my cycle and how is this going to transform things? So we're almost at the time here. I want to get in one more question with you is just, what would you say is one of the key things that you coach your women on to help them live in more alignment so that they can reach these goals that they are out there trying to achieve?
I think the first thing, there's a couple things. The first one is awareness, like we were talking about before, like going back into your story, you can't fix things if you're not aware, like if you're at this level of consciousness and you're not aware and you want to get to the next level, you have to pay attention. You have to become aware of what's going on. And the second one ties in with what we were talking about initially with wisdom. To me, wisdom is within and it's connected with intuition and an inner knowing. Wisdom is an inner knowing and that intuition. So it's a big practice. I have the women in my groups of just connecting and listening to that because we've been conditioned and programmed to think that the rational and the left side of our brain is more important, the analytical, the rational, we're presented with a situation and we're like, oh, let me analyze, let me get everyone's opinion. And we ignore the intuitive and the inner knowing, or we're looking for all the answers out there, like with science. Oh, the doctor said this. Oh, the other person said that. But what about you? What are you feeling inside? How are you connecting to that inner knowing? How are you connecting to that wisdom? How are you connecting to that intuition? Those, I think, are the two top things to focus on. And then the third one would be to take inspired action. When you do get that hit, you're sitting in meditation or you're going for a walk or you're journaling and you're like, oh, the doctor said this. I'm not feeling that. My body's feeling this, or maybe my advisors or my teacher or my coach or something suggested this thing, or my mastermind colleagues, in my group. But something's off. I just don't feel it. That I don't feel it is more powerful than what your doctor or your colleagues or your teacher or your, counselor or whatever has said, and just pay attention to that. And they take inspired action. It's like, well, what's the next best step that I can take in that direction? Don't just sit there waiting for things to change. You have to do something to ignite that, that change.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Okay. As we end this episode, before I give all your details of how to find you, I always end each of these interviews with one question for my audience. And it's to ask you, what is this week's womb-led tip? How can women live more by their womb in business?
It's that inner knowing. What's resonated for me, I was going to say intuition, but it's the wisdom that we have within us. It's just connect to that wisdom. You have the answers.
And I'll just add to that, that's been one of my biggest struggles is leaning into that inner knowing when it pops up, because sometimes the jump is really scary. But I've also learned that every time in my life where I've jumped and just hoped the bridge would build itself, it's always caught me. It's always caught me.
It does.
Yeah. And so sometimes if there's that big, I can feel it, but I'm scared, just jump and see. Because nothing is permanent. You can quit your job because it's like, I got to do this. And then you can go back and ask for your job back a year later if it's not right. Or the thing is, if you're living in alignment, the opportunities are always going to come. So I love that. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tania. For anybody who wants to know more about Tania, check out her website. It's amplifyyourabundance.com. I will put the link in the show notes so that it's easy for you to find. And check out her podcast, The Courage to Be. And if all this information you've been learning in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast has been inspiring, I invite you to come join me next week on March 7th, where we're going to be diving into a free webinar all around how to demystify to inspire. This is a webinar that's going to be designed to help you deepen into your own cycle wisdom and to start to think how we can apply this outside the box thinking to all the different arenas in our life so that we really are feeling inspired, living our best life, and feeling so completely aligned with ourselves. To register and save your spot, click on the link in the show notes below. Are you excited about aligning to your cycle? If so, make sure that you subscribe to this podcast and like the episode if it really resonated with you. Until next time, remember, womb wisdom equals connection to self, which ultimately equals inspired living.